See if I can search here. Okay, let me just try something else. Now, can you see it?
Yes, yes. This
okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's the one. Okay, finally. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, all right. So are we ready to begin?
Yes.
Yes?
You can start.
Okay. And I guess, Imrak, you're being recorded. I mean, we're being recorded, yes?
Yes, yes, yes. We are recording.
Okay. All right. So I'll take you through all the parts of the IELTS speaking examination, and I'll try and give you a few tips and pieces of advice from my side all these years, because I have been teaching the IELTS, and at the same time I have been examining the oral and the written parts of IELTS. So for those who are doing the academic or the general training IELTS, you should always, you should already know that IELTS general training or IELTS speaking, academic speaking are exactly the same. So there is no difference between the general training IELTS or academic. I will begin with part one, IELTS speaking, which is, let's say, it's a very, okay, it's quite an easy part. Part one, it's quite an easy part. It lasts for about 4 or 5 minutes. And it's of course, it's marked. Unlike the IGCSE speaking exam, which is not marked, IELTS part one examination of the speaking is marked. Now, examiners will definitely ask you one of these ABC questions that you see on your screens. So for sure, you will get one of the 3 questions, either asking about your work or studies, or where you live, or where you live has actually 2 branches. We could ask you about where you live. Do you live in a house or in an apartment? Or we could ask you to tell us about your hometown or, you know, native country. So that's for sure one of the 2. One of these 3 questions you will have for sure. Once this is done and you give us a full profile and full description of your work, studies, hometown or whatsoever, the examiner will also choose 2 of the following topics. Of course, there are many more topics than that, but I'm just giving you an idea of what we mean by one of these topics. Although these topics seem a bit, you know, difficult, and say, what am I going to say about names? All these topics are designed to make you feel at ease, because it's the first part of the exam. And secondly, they're aiming to get more information about you. So all these topics revolve around you and your, let's say, profile. So if I had to give you, if I wanted to be more specific, the examiners, I'll give you an example of what we mean by asking around you. So an example of what the examiner may ask you. Now let's talk about names, and this is the topic, which is names. We will revolve all the questions around you. So what does your name mean? What do people do in your country when babies are given names? Why do people give these names? And so forth. Here, there's, let's say, an interview of someone talking about his hometown or village as a small part of part one, but I don't think time will be on our side today, so I will just skip this and move on to the next part and give you also my advice and tips. The next 4 or 5 slides, it's basically a few useful expressions that candidates can use when they want to talk about their hometown, where they live, personal dreams or ambitions, work profile, study profile, and they're quite useful expressions, and the examiners are really looking for these, because don't forget, IELTS is quite an advanced level of English proficiency, so we expect candidates to use a variety of grammatical structures and a variety of vocabulary. So the next slide, I'm just giving you some useful expressions in terms of, you know, what to say when you want to talk about your job or your studies, and you can see all the expressions listed there. Please feel free to use them. This is what I have selected, you know, throughout the years. This one, for example, is about your occupation, your profession, whether it's studying or at work. More useful expressions about future plans, future ambitions. You might get a topic about, let's talk about places. And again, this will be revolved around you, because part one has to do about you as a candidate. Yes, some more about places, spare time. These are the topics you will get for part one IELTS speaking. And feel free to go through them later. I will then go to all these. Okay, now part two, part two is a bit, it's a little bit more demanding, I would say, and a little bit more difficult. Part two requires candidates to, let's say, monologue. It's just they select, the examiner gives them a topic, and they are asked to look at the topic, look at the prompts. They have 1 minute to make notes, and then they have 2 minutes to talk on their own. This is also called the long turn, and it's like a monologue. The examiner will say the following: now I'm going to give you a topic, and I'd like you to talk for about 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. You can make some notes if you wish. And here, after the question, do you understand? Candidates must say yes, clearly, so they're being recorded. The examiner then gives the candidate some paper and a pencil, and 1 minute to make notes on the topic that he has been given. After the 1 minute is over, the examiner will, let's say, verify and confirm if everything is okay, asking him again, all right, remember you have 2 minutes for this. Don't worry if I stop you, I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking, please? And the candidate, of course, begins his or her monologue. Now, my suggestion here is that you have to make notes, because notes will be your guidance throughout your monologue. And 2 minutes are quite, they seem a long time when you do your monologue. So please make sure you make notes around the topic that you're given. And the notes could be, just to make it easier for you, the notes could be like the WH questions: who, what, where, why, how. And that will also help you to make more notes around that topic. Once you finish with your 1 minute notes and you begin your monologue, remember to give an introductory sentence. It's quite important. It establishes the set and the scene, let's say. It sets the scene. So you reply to the examiner, yes, of course, I'd like to talk to you about okay. And I've also given you a sample interview of someone presenting his 2 minutes monologue on the most important item you have. Now, some techniques for this part, because this part is quite challenging, as I said before, and it's quite difficult for some candidates because we have this time pressure, and we also have this, there is no interaction with the examiner. And when there is no interaction, this puts more pressure on the candidates, and sometimes their mind blocks. And even no matter how well prepared you are, sometimes you might get these stressful feelings. Some techniques for being well prepared for part 2. Let's say you got a topic and definitely is not enough for you as a candidate because you will score very low. So yes, I like films, it's not enough. So one of my tips that I could easily give you is to think of the question words you put in your notes, which is who, what, where, when, how, and why. So if you're talking about films, try to incorporate in your talk all these who did you go with, where did you go, when did you go, what, maybe what was the weather like, or what was the occasion like, and why, and then start describing the film itself. Tip number 2, try to give examples. Try to give lots of examples, because the examples will help you extend and elaborate your reply. Don't forget to say the whys. There's always a lot of whys behind your statement. So yes, you like the film, make sure you say why you like the film. You like the place, make sure you say why. When you describe when and who, please extend and give us more details, okay? We are not testing you on your knowledge and intelligence. We're testing your English language proficiency, which means we expect you to elaborate and extend your answers. So don't worry if you say a few more things about your friend Peter or Mary who came with you to the cinema or to the movies. Yes, don't forget to develop your answers, and don't forget to use discourse markers. The discourse markers are something different from fillers of what you see now on my screen. The fillers are those small words or expressions that will fill the gaps, because we don't like candidates hesitating for too long. We don't like candidates who leave long pauses. So make sure you fill those gaps with, well, what I mean, in fact, to be honest, not really, actually, and so forth. And of course, discourse markers such as additionally, plus, above all, besides that, we need to hear that, because these are also the signals so that we can follow you. Coming on to another technique, which you can see now on my screen, and I'm talking about part 2, which is quite the most challenging, I'd say. In case you get stuck and you run out of ideas for your topic, try to use the PPF technique. Now, this PPF technique, it's basically an acronym for talking about the present, talking about the past, and talking about the future. So if we take, for example, let's take an example. The examiner gives you the topic of describe a restaurant you've been to, or describe a restaurant you like. And you've covered everything, you've talked about the restaurant, and you still have some more time. And the examiner might do this to you, like, you know, keep talking because you have more time. There's nothing wrong for you to use this technique in terms of referring to your past or referring to your future. So if I take the restaurant as an example, like I mentioned before, and let's say you talked about the restaurant that you like now, you are very free to talk about a restaurant which you liked as a child. So you could refer to your past and say, yes, apart from this, I also, when I was young, I used to like this restaurant because I used to go with my grandparents and we used to have, I don't know, the most excellent, you know, kind of dishes there. And of course, another restaurant which I would like to visit in the future would be this restaurant in Dubai. So don't forget to incorporate the present, but also past and future in part 2, whatever the topic you get. Okay, and this is only when you run out of what to say. The next 3 slides, I'm just showing you what the examiner will be giving you for this IELTS speaking part 2. So the examiner will give you the topic card, and he or she will tell you, you now have 1 minute to make notes. I would like you to describe a film that you would like to see in the future. And you can see the prompts on below the topic. Okay. Don't forget, as I said before, make notes, because you will need them. You will need to refer to your notes. This is another topic card, another example. Describe a big public event that you have attended. You should say what it was, when it was held, and why, and what happened. Explain how you felt about being there. And again, don't forget, use the techniques I told you. Give examples, elaborate, extend, use the PPF if possible. And this is another topic card. Okay, any questions so far? Before I move on to part 3.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, Karin.
Yes. So, ma'am, I want to ask that we discuss about the PPF method, and it looks very like a wordful method. So, as you have shown the previous cue card, in which it was written that the film you're gonna watch in future. So it means we cannot define a present or a past film. So
yes,
because it has mentioned here, yeah. So how we will apply the PPF method in it?
Okay. Yeah. All right. As I said before, we're not testing intelligence or knowledge. Okay. So if you're capable enough to signpost the examiner and say, well, actually, the film I would like to talk to you about is not a film I would like to see in the future, but is a film I saw last week, then that's okay. All right, as long as you are aware and you're signposting the examiner. Now, coming back to, I'll give you another example here. Describe a public event that you have attended. You could also twist it around and say, again, in your introductory sentence, and say, I would like to talk to you about a public event that I would like to attend in the future. So please feel free to play around the tenses, but bear in mind you say that to the examiner. Bear in mind you make us aware of that, okay? So as far as the PPF technique, you're free to change around the tenses, but remember to signpost us. Okay, Farin?
Anfa, what are you doing, yaar?
Hello?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, all right. Yes, so to answer your question is that you can refer, even if the topic card mentions a detail about the future or the past, yes, because you might get something like describe a film you saw last week, you can still change it into the future and vice versa, but you need to tell and signpost the examiners. Okay, it would have been wrong if we gave you a card about describe a film and you talked about a restaurant. That would have been totally not wrong. We would still be checking your language, your English language proficiency, but you would be a little bit off topic. Okay.
Yeah.
Any question from other participants? Any other participant want to say anything? Then we will move from next session.
So we can move on to part 3 if you don't have any other questions.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, one more thing, like you are saying that we have to use a signpost language. So we can say that let me take into my past that I was visiting most of the time the historical places, because we have to use a PPF method and we have to switch ourselves from the present to the past. So we use this signpost language that let me take into my past. So it will
Yes.
be, won't be a wrong.
Actually, it will be it will be easier, not just for the examiner, because don't forget you're being recorded and the MP3s are sent over to Cambridge University. So signposting gives the opportunity and it makes it easier for the listeners to follow you.
Yeah.
So yes, when you do refer and when you do refer from the present or the past, if you need to mention the past, you could just say, yes, now I would like also to talk to you about another restaurant which I used to go with my grandparents when I was young. So the listeners, the audience can follow you.
Okay, ma'am, you can go towards another section.
Okay, we're moving on to part 3. Yes. Now, part 3 lasts for about 5 minutes, I would say, 450 or 56 minutes. That's what the examiners are looking for. You should know that part 3, it's basically, it's more interactive. In other words, it's a discussion with the examiner. Okay, so unlike part 2, which is just the monologue and you feel a bit weird, just talking without interaction. Part 3, it's quite friendlier, I would say, and it's more interactive. You should also know that part 3 is related to part 2. So the examiner will bridge this, will connect part 2 with part 3, and he or she will start with, we've been talking about a film you enjoyed watching recently. I'd like to discuss with you 1 or 2 more general questions related to this. Let's consider first of all. So if part 2 was, let's say, about restaurants, part 3 could be about eating out, fast food, restaurants in general, okay? If part 2 was about films, watching a film, or the film you watched, part 3 will be related to film watching, film awards, cinematography. So to make it more, to generalize, I would say that part 3 is related to part 2, but it's more general, okay? In part 3, you are free to ask any questions or clarifications, meaning something you cannot do in part 2. In part 2, you may not ask questions and you may not, you can't really ask any questions. For part 3, you are free to ask for any clarification. So feel free to ask the examiner, do you mean, are you saying, or sorry, could you repeat, please? The examiner will also put, let's say, will try to debate and give you an argumentative perspective. Remember also to develop and extend your answers. Okay, so if the examiner puts a question first, and I'll give you an example. Some people say that the cinema industry nowadays is facing a crisis. What do you think? First, it's better to give a short answer. That's one of the tips I would give you, because that helps you to buy time and prepare your school of thought and your train of thoughts. Secondly, apart from answering in short, you could also repeat the examiner by answering. For example, yes, sir, yes, madam, I fully agree with you that the cinema industry nowadays is facing crisis. And that means that you're repeating the examiner's question in a way, but on the other hand, you're buying yourself time, okay? And the other tip is what I told you before, help yourself in buying time by answering in short. So in the question that you can see on the slide, do you think that the cinema industry nowadays is facing a crisis? You could just answer in short first and say, yes, absolutely. Or I wouldn't say so. Or I'm not sure about that. And then begin to explain and elaborate. I have included a sample interview of part 3, but of course you can view a lot of interviews on YouTube, and even if you put the bands down, you can get the parts and the bands with lots of interviews and examples. The marking criteria for all the IELTS parts, and I told you this before, remember, we need to hear you talking. We need to hear you developing answers and elaborating and giving examples. We're looking for your fluency, speaking fluency. We're looking for grammatical structures and grammatical, awareness, to have an awareness. Fluency means not to have too many hesitations, not to have too long pauses. And I'm not talking about natural pauses, because, when we speak, we pause naturally to get our breath. That's different. I'm talking about pauses like and I can see as an examiner that you don't know the words or you don't know how to construct the sentence. Okay, this is what I mean by pausing. We're also looking for the willingness of the candidate to speak at length, and that's important. So it's not a knowledge or intelligence test. We need you to develop and speak at length. So part 1, as I said before, it's around you. You will get the personal profile question about your work or studies, or about your hometown or where you live, if it's a house or an apartment. Develop that into more detail. Okay. In part 1, the examiner will only be asking you whys, only whys. So be prepared for that. So even if you say, I am an engineer and I have been working XYZ for 10 years and I like my job very much, the examiner will throw a why at you. And there's a reason for that. It's because we want you to elaborate and give examples. Coming back to part 2, you cannot ask questions there. You may not ask questions. So even if you ask for clarifications, the examiner will not give you a clarification, simply because part 2, it's basically descriptive cue card. You get a descriptive card where you have to describe something. Okay. And if I could give you another tip for part 2, you should be able to prepare 5 or 6 basic topics. One of them is a person. You should be well aware how to describe a person, or historical or famous person, I don't know. You should be able to describe a piece of equipment, and most candidates usually prepare the laptop or smartphone. You should be able to have a monologue and prepare an event or a festival, a book, a film, and a place. So if I could give you another piece of advice, these 6 topics are quite very basic, but also versatile. And what I mean by versatile is that if the examiner gives you a topic about describe a photo, some candidates get stressed and they don't know what to say, and they choose very difficult topics. Other candidates, which are well prepared, they make the introductory sentence and they say, actually, the photo I would like to talk to you about is the photo of my grandfather. And they start talking about their grandfather, which is already prepared. Okay. So please remember, these are the tips and pieces of advice, but these are also the criteria, what we're looking for when we're marking your speaking test. And in the next slide, I have put, you can find the marking criteria, the band descriptors, online, of course. And you can see the 4 criteria. This is what we're looking for. And you can see the bands from 0 to 9. So the first criterion is fluency and coherence. Fluency, you understand, it's the flow, the speed. We don't want you to talk too fast. We don't want you to be too slow. Fluency also means we want you to be willing to speak at length. We want you to have very little hesitation and to speak fluently and join ideas and signpost. Coherence also means the flow and progression as well, and how clear you are. Lexical resource is the variety of vocabulary you use. So please remember, we're looking for the vocabulary, the uncommon vocabulary, and the vocabulary around level B2, which is more advanced vocabulary. We're also looking for idioms and collocations. Yes, I like hanging out with my friends. I'm very keen on playing tennis and so forth. So we're looking for these expressions that will make the difference from 5 to 6 to 7. And as regards grammatical range and accuracy, this depends, of course, on the grammar, but we're also looking for the mistakes. Mistakes are different from errors. So if I have people making mistakes on the grammar tenses or how we use or form the tenses, then this band will go down. If I can hear these mistakes that are occasional, it's okay. But if these mistakes are persisting and the candidate keeps making these mistakes all the time, then the grammar goes down. If you want to score higher in your grammar, I would suggest to produce a mix of complex sentences as well. And what I mean by complex sentences is using, although I like, or not only do I like this restaurant, but I also prefer. So try to give us complex sentences and a range of complex structures. And of course, pronunciation. Okay, pronunciation is quite clear what we mean by pronunciation. We need you to be phonetically and phonemically clear. We need you to be easily and generally understood. And that's why I need you to link your ideas and signpost and make pauses, but natural pauses. Remember, don't talk too fast, don't talk too slow. That's all, I think, as far as my presentation and the marking criteria and a few tips and pieces of advice that I could give you today. Yes, Imrag, I think I'm done.
Thank you very much, Tasula. What a wonderful presentation. MashaAllah, you enlightened us. And we all OPAP team are welcome, are very grateful to you that you spare your precious time. And of course, instead you are so busy and you are involved in different seminar and workshop, but because you committed that you will definitely do some session with us, and hopefully we will try to make some sort of arrangement, because Pakistani community feel proud to have you in our team, like as a trainer, and inshallah we will develop some sort of collaboration, because you know the Pakistani students, majority of the students, they want to travel to for the study to other countries, and IELTS and TOEFL, you know, this is the basic requirement for the admission. So inshallah, we will introduce some paid session also, and we will personally discuss with you and about your schedule, about all the duration, about the course content and everything. So if over to the participant, if anybody having any question, I think Dr. Sadaf also joined. So Dr. Sadaf, welcome.
Hello, hello Tasula.
Hello, Dr. Saida. I'm okay, thank you. Yourself?
I'm good. It was one wonderful session.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
I was listening, and it was a great session.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much.
I want